Hey, this is Professor Triplet, and this week we are going to revisit this, which was week 1, because we're ready. We have a bunch of tools under our belt, and now it's time to really start modeling, like actually touching the verts and the planes and everything and manipulating them by hand. So let's get going. All right. One concept that's really important to modeling is references. So if we're going to create the unit block shapes that we were just looking at, then we want to have a reference inside of Maya so that we can build it to that reference. So I've gone ahead and made it a little bit easier and taken pictures and references for this assignment already. So no worries if you don't have unit blocks, you will have the references from the pictures. But the first thing we have to learn is how do we get those images into Maya and get them at the right size. Well, first thing let's do is just go back to Photoshop really quick here, and I'm actually going to drag it in from the other screen. There we go. So these are at an angle in this picture, and so they're not going to work too well because to build off of something, we really want to have an orthographic view. Okay, but with these angles, we're getting a 3/4 view, and while it's great for seeing the object and seeing its overall shape, it's not great for building with. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up a few files here, and we're going to find them. Let's see here. It should be actually right here. So just open up this first one. This is probably the most important one. As you can see, I've taken a picture of the unit block as orthographically as possible. Whenever you take a picture with a camera, no matter what, you're going to have some kind of lens distortion, even if it's very slight. If you have a camera with a good zoom on it, you want to get as far back as you can from your object and zoom in on the object. That will limit the distortion, and I've done that to a point here, but it's there's still a little distortion, and the way you can tell that is that if you look, particularly we can look over here and you see how this line comes here, and it looks like it might line up with one of these tick marks over here, but realistically it's actually lining up somewhere more over here with this tick line. But from our picture it looks different, and if we come down here we can kind of see the same thing happening, where this is actually lining up with the 12 in the real world, but because of the distortion from the perspective, we get a little bit of you know, just it looks like it's hanging over, but it's really not. It's actually pretty much in line with it. So just keep that in mind when we're building these things. So realistically, if we look at these measurements, what we really have is this block is it's a square going in the would be in the X and the Z plane. It's a square, so that would be X and Z, and then in the Y, you can see it's more of a rectangular shape, or it's longer. So what we have is 3.5 centimeters, and then in the Y it's 7 centimeters. So the unit blocks are all built off of basically this kind of size, where this is half of this, and that's how you would know like a shape like this is actually 2 of these blocks basically put together and then cut along the hypotenuse. So, and that would be the diagonal cut between the two verts in the corners. So a block like this, even though it is circular, it is actually the height of 2 of these stacked on top of each other. So if this is 7 centimeters, then this is going to be 14 centimeters, so forth and so on. So we always can tell that as long as we have this first measurement of a unit block, we know that the rest of them will be some kind of multiple of it. And there are a few special cases and I have taken specific pictures for those special cases for future assignments. But in this assignment, we're dealing with pretty much the basics, so it should be pretty easy to just work off of this. So let's get back into Maya, and we want to bring this picture into Maya. So let's go back, if I can find it. There it is. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is lay down a plane. So just drop a plane into the scene. And the next thing we want to do is, I'm just going to grab this plane and just make it bigger so I can see it for right now. And I'm going to make this 1 by 1 so that we don't have any segments. And right now, we want it to face us, like as if we were looking in the front view. So the front would be the z-axis. So you see this little blue tick mark here? That's going to be the front, pointing this way. Okay, so right now, obviously, it is on the x and z-axis, but we wanted to point to be front view as z-axis, so we're going to rotate it. So let's go ahead and get a rotation here, and with my rotation, if I grab just on this handle that's turned yellow right there, it's normally actually it's not always yellow, it would be red if we deselect it, but this axis right here, which is rotating it on the x-axis, we're going to just hold J on your keyboard and it will snap, and we can snap it to 90 degrees. Now your snaps might not work correctly. If they do not, you'll have to play in your tool settings, which to bring that up, I double clicked on tools, on this tool here, and which is the rotation tool, by the way, and you'll have to go ahead and look at your step snap. If it's off, then you hold J to toggle it on, but if it is already on and it's set to relative, then it's going to snap to whatever the setting is, and usually I think it's at 15, so I think that's the normal setting. So since I have it off here, and if I hold J, it's going to toggle it on. Okay. Alright, so we are at 90 degrees. We can see in our channel box here, which is this first guy right here, that we are at 90 degrees in the X rotation. Close this now. So that's where we want to be, because if I go to my front view, so hold spacebar and left click and drag down front view, you can see now we can see the plane perfectly flat and square, and that's what we want to do. So let's go back to our perspective for right now, and let's make a material for this, because we have to drop some kind of color texture on here. So I already have my material palette up, but I'll go ahead and close it and just hit it again. You could hit this little round button here for your, it's actually called Hypershade, but it's where your materials live. You also can find it through Windows, rendering editors, Hypershade. So it's right here as well. So either one will work. Okay, so if you open up your Hypershade, you're going to find something like this. And by default, Maya always has these three shaders in here. And the Lambert is the shader it puts on every piece of geometry by default. So if I go ahead and hit this little button that's going to show input and output connections, it's going to show you basically like a visual representation of all the things that you can put into a Lambert, and then it's going to show you some stuff that's going out of the Lambert to like the renderer basically. So what you have here is, you've got color, you've got an ambient color, an incandescent color, and we're not going to play with most of these right now, but we do want to put something into the color. But we don't have to use this interface, although this is a nice interface to use. We actually can just double click on this, or just single click on it, and you'll get the attributes for this coming up right here. And so you'll see this color right here is the same thing as the color right here. It's just in a different kind of format. It's just like a little window that shows it. So this is kind of the old way that it used to be. They also had a graph view before as well, but it was a little bit different than this. But so this is just the way you can click on this box, and then you can input a file. So we're going to hit File, and then you have to click on this folder, and then you have to find that Unitblock picture. Okay, so you would find this Unitblock picture and hit Open, and now you can see you have a shader here. If I hold Alt, just like rotating the viewport, I can hold Alt and I can move this back and forth and such. Okay, so that's this is just showing you like a material creation, if you will, simple, just adding one texture to it. So now I'll select my object, and then I'll right click and hold the right click down, and you'll get your option box coming up, and then you can go to assign existing material. So I'm still holding right click, by the way, and I just hit Lambert. Now if I hit, let's see, if I hit 6 on my keyboard, then that will bring up your texture view. So now I can actually view my textures on my object. If I hit 5, it's just your shaded view, and then 4 is wireframe. So that's 6. If you hit 7, it goes into lit view, and since there's no lights in the scene, you can't see anything, so it turns black. So if you hit 7 on accident and it goes black, that's probably what you did. All right, so let's go back to looking at our shader again. We put this on our original Lambert, but what's going to happen then is that any object we make, it's actually going to take this texture and put this on everything. So we really don't want that, so let's make a new Lambert. So over here, you can see there's all these different kinds of materials you can make. And the reason why for a reference we want to use a Lambert is we don't want any specularity or reflections or anything like that. We just want a flat color, basically, and that's what the Lambert gives us. So I'm going to go ahead and, so I've got my Lambert here. This is my new one. I want to make sure that I click on it and then I name it. And the way I like to do this is I always put an M, and that represents material, and then I put an underscore, and then I'll name it. So in this case, it's ref underscore Unitblock. There we go. Okay, so that's how I do my naming convention. Almost any material I make, I'll have an M in front of it. And if it's a reference material, I usually put M underscore ref and then whatever it's called. All right, so for right now, if I wanted to, I could actually just drag this out color into the settings over here, but I'm just going to do it the old way that I showed already, just so there's no confusions. But you could actually just, you could take, this is actually representing that file we added in, and you could just actually go like that, and you could put that file in there. So now this has the same file, but I'm going to actually click on this and delete that. Okay, so that's one way to break the connection, is you can click on that little line and delete it. The other way you can break the connection is we come up, I'm just going to show you how you can break a connection in any material. So for this first Lambert, let's say we don't want all of our textures to show up like this on everything that we make. So we're just going to right click next to the color, and you'll see it has a thing that says break connections. So I just hit break, and if you notice, this little line disappeared. And so we'll just go ahead and delete all this. You cannot delete this in this Lambert, so it won't let you. So let's go ahead and just put that texture back in. We'll go over it one more time. We go File, and then we get this little folder up, and we click on the folder, and then we find our unit blocks and say OK. So there we go. Put that down here, and you know, if you click on this, it'll whatever you have selected, this will lay out the input and output connections. So the input connections are these going into the color. The output is the Lambert. This is actually representing the fact that it's sending this to the renderer so it can render. Okay. If you wanted just input connections, you can hit this, and just these, just the connections coming in comes in, or vice versa, you can go just the output connections. So this also works for like whenever you see, if you're in your attribute editor in the scene. So I'll close this. Like if you're in your attribute editor in the scene, so hit Control A. If you're on your channel box, hit Control A. Or actually, you can just hit Control A anytime. It'll take you to your attribute editor. You'll see these little like basically like arrows. This is the same thing. So if I click this, it's going to say what's going into this this texture node right here. And if I click this, it's going what is it going out to? So basically, it's going out to the shader, and there, of course, it has an origin point too. So let me select this. You can see how this works. I selected the plane. Let me hit 6 on the keyboard. Oh, we haven't assigned it yet, so it doesn't have that anymore. So let's right click and hold, or right click down, hit existing material and select it. So there we go. Now we've got that in the scene. All right, so go ahead and look at these up here. So we have all of these different like little tabs up here that are different planes in our attribute editor, and these little panels are basically representing the different connections or different pieces of script, if you will, that define this object. And don't get too worried about me mentioning something like script. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you understand that like for this object, there's this p-plane connection, which basically defines where it's translated to, what its rotation is, what its scale is, the rotation order, which you can change, and then like the rotation axis, so you can change what's the axis it rotates on, and all these other things that typically you might not ever touch, but if you get into certain disciplines within Maya, you may mess with these things. Okay, but then this is connected to this, and now you can see if we go into here and we start hitting like input and output. Okay, so now this has an input, and the input is a polyplane. If I go out, then it goes to the plane shape. All right, so I'm just showing that these are different things are connected to different things, and this is how you would navigate through what's the inputs and outputs. I know that was a long explanation, so let's move on. All right, so here we go. So you'll notice that with this plane shape that we also have now the material. So these are connected together. Okay, so it's up here in this tab. If you have a whole ton of tabs up here, it's probably because you need to delete your history. Sometimes the history gets really heavy and it puts all these different tabs up here with different inputs and outputs and stuff. So you don't always want to delete your history, but usually when you're done modeling, you do delete your history, or sometime in the middle you will delete your history, especially if Maya starts running really slow. Then you probably want to delete your history. Okay, so now that we've got this here, it's probably not the right size. I used a centimeter section here because we can actually make a cube and dial in the actual numbers that will make the cube the right size. Okay, so since Maya's already in centimeters, that makes it pretty easy. Let's just go ahead and hit our cube button here, make a box, and then we'll go into our channel box, and let's open the cube up, and let's go ahead and change this. So we know it's 7 centimeters because we've got that measured here, and then we know these are 3.5. 3.5 in the X and 3.5 in the Y, or Z, sorry. The height is the Y, by the way. Okay, so now if we look at this, we can see that, yeah, this looks like it could be the same shape as this, but this is the wrong size as far as the size of our reference goes. If we wanted to check this to see if it was the right size, we could do that. So let me show you a little trick. We'll go to our front view, and we know how to move a pivot, right? So we hit D on our keyboard, and we can go ahead and move our pivot. I'm going to move my pivot right so it's here in the corner here. And then I'm going to hit D again. So now we've got our pivot there. So if I want to find out if this thing's the right size, I can go ahead and snap this. So I'm going to go ahead and snap it to this vert down here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit W on my keyboard and hit V. And then with the V, I'm going to snap it down here. Now, of course, we can't see it because it's kind of behind this object, and obviously that's going to be a problem. So what do we do about that? Well, temporarily, in my perspective view, I can just pull this forward a little bit like so, and so now it's sitting in front of that object. I think I have a snap still on. Yeah, I have the snap on for some reason. Okay. I probably did that by hitting a hotkey on accident. Alright, so let's go back to our front view. And now we can tell if we scale this up. Yeah, all of my stuff has a snap on now. I must have hit a hotkey to turn my snaps on. Okay, sorry about that. So let's see where we jump to. Okay. So now if we scale this, and I can go ahead and hit 4 on my keyboard, and I can see if this is, I can toggle between 4 and 6. It needs a little bit more ways to go. I can also just move this over a little bit so I can see when it gets lined up. and I can go ahead and just scale it from here like so, and now I can tell that that's right where it needs to be, and I can move this back and just snap it back. Okay, so now if I come back to my perspective and I move this back to the 0 in the, oops, wrong one. I want 0 in the Z plane. Then they should basically be fitting almost perfectly on top of each other, which they are. So just a little bit of an adjustment here, like so, because we have some beveled edges and the wood's not completely perfect because it's kind of hand cut wood, but you can see it's almost perfect. So this measurement is accurate with how Maya works, and now you can tell that just by transferring this picture into here and getting it the right size and lining it up correctly. Okay, so for the rest of our objects, we're going to do similar things to this, but for the rest of our objects, we don't really have to keep measuring this. I just wanted to show how these things work together, so that if you ever took a picture of something and needed to try to get it the right size, you could do a method like this. You could try using a measurement, or you could try using something that you know the size of and kind of just scale it based on that. Like you can have some kind of reference in there, like a penny or something like that. So just wanted to get that out. So this is the first part, just getting a unit block size here so that we can work from this point to make the rest of our blocks and make them accurate. So let's move on.